worked sales with a base, commissions on top, a company card for client needs, and a pool car I never liked driving. The week before a long holiday, my manager asked if I had bandwidth. I said I did. A senior client needed a gift delivered. No address context, just a name and a PIN. I took my own electric SUV instead of the pool car because the battery was full and the highway pilot would buy me silence. The navigation left the interstate early and sank me into switchbacks. Guardrail, pines, dark soil. The time estimate stretched not from speed, but from topography, curves that refused to end. A village appeared like a rumor and then emptied again. The pin settled on a property near the mouth of a hollow. The gate stood open. Heavy timber. No keypad, no camera visible at eye level. The kind of openness that announces ownership more than welcome. I parked outside the line of sight, lifted the gift hamper from the trunk, and walked through. Lawn cut to a uniform hum. Koi pushing slow commas through a square pond. A short fountain with a mineral smell. Gravel that recorded each step like a ledger. The main house stretched laterally. Single story, long eaves, dark wood that had been coaxed rather than painted. Doors deep enough to hide the thickness of their frames. A chime answered when I found it. A woman's voice over an intercom asked who had come. The door released. Inside, wood grain, wax, and coffee. Not the kitchen kind. Roast-level coffee with citrus and smoke. In the living room, a tall man worked a cloth over a potted orchid as if polishing an instrument. Broad shoulders, late 70s by posture rather than face. A presence that made the air feel arranged. He gestured once. I set the hamper down where the gesture implied, and the house absorbed the small thud. He brought me to a room that was not a kitchen and not a cafe, but functioned as both. A small drum roaster on a steel table. Sacks stamped with origins and harvest years. An espresso machine that needed a proper breaker. Hand brewers lined like instruments on a pegboard. He ground, tamped, poured, and waited without speaking to me. The coffee held thick and clean. I tasted citrus, then cedar, then a bitter edge that didn't linger. He watched my mouth for data. Time moved under the smell of roast and the scratch of a microfiber cloth on chrome. When I checked my phone, the light outside had changed from white to iron. He fed me. The meal came on plain ceramic, nothing theatrical, nothing cheap. Protein, greens, starch, salt that tasted like it had a producer. I ate what was placed, kept my notes minimal, logged his surname against the address. The road back took longer in the dark, and the car's lane keep nudged me like a patient tap on the shoulder. Family obligations filled the next morning. I drove relatives out to pay respects and back along a two-lane that narrowed at the culverts. The child in the rear passenger side seat slept until his body stiffened and he clawed at his belt. His mother unlatched him and held him while he shook. He used words, but they came in fragments that didn't help anyone decide what had happened. Later, an older relative dozed in the same seat and woke hard, breathing like he'd surfaced. He dismissed it, then mentioned a dream with a blade in it, then dismissed it again. Driving alone after drop-offs, the car misread occupancy in the rear. The belt chime started, stopped, started, a pattern that meant someone had shifted without buckling, which was untrue. The visualization beside the speed readout showed a gray human figure at the rear right. It faded when the chime stopped. It returned when the chime started. I knew false positives existed. Damp roads, reflective signage, and certain angles often confused sensors. I still felt the nudge to schedule service. That night, a nightmare played out with the clarity of dehydration. A woman older than anyone in my family asked me where I had brought her and why. No place name. No accusation formed as a sentence I could write down. She lifted fabric in a way that suggested a pocket made of the same fabric, then produced a knife. My brain located a door that wasn't nearest and moved for it. Waking came like a switch. The bedroom light stayed off. The sound was my own breath. The call from the owner found me at my desk 2 days later through the company line. Word had fed upward that the delivery had landed, and the client had enjoyed the interaction. I was told to bring catalogs next time. The second drive took the company car as a matter of optics. The same road, the same trees, the same gate still open. Inside, the same scent of oil and wood polish, the same careful indoor temperature. He filled my time. The orchids, the watering regime, the potting medium sifted to specific sizes. Coffee comparisons, washed versus natural, altitude, defects per 100 grams. The property drawn in walking routes. Garden, pond. A detached garage with a lighted strip above the door. A small building that might have been storage or just shape. He asked nothing I could log as an order. He opened bottles near dinner and expected me to empty a glass. I nodded and didn't finish. He set 2 more on the table and watched for compliance. I excused myself and made a private decision in a private bathroom with a faucet running. He assigned me a bedroom the size of my first apartment's footprint. Thick floor mats, a low table with paper, a lacquered chest with dovetail joints. The window was wood within wood, then glass, then the void of a courtyard that the house wrapped like a mouth around a seed. With the interior panel closed, the room took on a muffled quality that held my own heartbeat in place. I woke again, not at my choosing. No voices, no house sounds. A rectangular smear of light lay across the floor. I pushed the inner panel aside and found the glass. The courtyard reflected enough moon to separate shapes from each other. In the center stood a mound. At first it read as a shrub with bad grooming. A closer angle with my phone's flashlight told a more literal story. Metal caught the light in rows, handles upward, blades down, stabbed into the earth until only their grips remained as a grid. The angles were irregular enough to suggest they had been planted at different times by a hand that adjusted for resistance rather than symmetry. A string, or many strings, crossed among the handles like a web built according to rules I didn't recognize. At one side, the mound slumped slightly, soil loosening like a shoulder seam letting go. The air smelled like wet clay and something mineral, not rot, not fertilizer. My stomach signaled. I closed the panel. I listened to the house settle into itself. Sleep did not return. A pen lay on the low table. Paper accepted ink without bleeding. I wrote down what I had been given, what I had seen, what I would do next to avoid further time in a bedroom that attached to a courtyard with a mound in it. The note named gratitude and necessity, placed it where he would find it, and left without generating extra sound. The morning absorbed me back into my office. The owner called my boss instead of me. I received an instruction to apologize on my next visit. I received the number that reached him directly. I saved it, then set the car service appointment for the sensors that had cried wolf in a pattern I didn't like, even if I could explain it. The appointment date went on my calendar. The evening found me watching the rear camera feeds on a loop as if repetition would make a shape stabilize. The third invitation arrived sooner than the calendar expected. The caller ID showed the name I had saved. He wanted another visit, this time with no pretense of sales material. I thought about the mound. I thought about the strings across the handles. I thought about my phone light reflected back at me by glass. I returned anyway because the pattern already had me in it, and because declining without reason creates its own noise in the wrong ear. The gate was open again. The courtyard waited behind wood and glass again. The day processed toward the point where the house changed tones. The bottles came out again, the labels expensive on purpose, the pours heavier than the first night. I answered with water when I could, with time when I had to, with a posture that suggested compliance more than it performed it. When the bedroom door closed, the floor did not immediately broadcast footsteps walking away. The house stalled as if listening. I feigned sleep, breath with a cadence. A short snore forced through the nose. Quiet moved like a person choosing where to step. At some point the house committed to the idea of me sleeping. Sound began again, soft and directional, sliding down the hall and dissolving near a corner I had counted earlier. I opened the inner panel and pressed my forehead to the glass. The mound stood where it had stood. The strings held their taut, meaningless lines. The knives waited like a field of metal stems. I opened the door to the hall with my hand under the knob to manage the latch. The phone light wore my fingers as a hood. The room 2 down hid a door to the courtyard. I had mapped it during the tour. The knob was colder than the hall. The hinge announced itself with a breath and then silence. Gravel took my weight as data and stored it. The air cooled the inside of my mouth. Up close, the mound read as deliberate earthwork rather than lawn disease. The knives varied in make and age. Some were new enough to shine beneath dust. Some had pitted brass at the guard. Some lacked guards entirely and had tape residue on the handle where someone had improved grip with friction. I lifted one to test the stuckness and found the soil shallow at the edge and resistant near the crown. The sound of steel against particulate carried more than I wanted, but stopping would not make time go backward. I worked a pattern: twist, pull, set down. The strings loosened where the handles had been anchors and sagged without explaining anything. At the slumped side, the earth gave to my hands. Dirt creased under fingernails, cold under the second knuckle. Then a ceramic shoulder, rounded, rough, sized to be held by a person who meant to lift with the arms, not the back. Adhesive along the lid had been reinforced with strips of paper worked in paste. They tore like labels soaked from a bottle. The smell inside was dry and old, not chemical. Powder slid out in small avalanches when I tipped. The texture looked like it would hold a fingerprint. I emptied the container to the last sediment. My hands shook not from fear but from precision work done fast. I set the vessel upside down and reduced it to manageable fragments with a strike that sounded wrong and then right. Movement at the edge of the property appeared as a silhouette before it resolved as an object. Human-sized, placed at the main gate. Hands by its sides, head too still. The brain calls any upright shape at a door a person until it is forced to recategorize. The reclassification arrived when distance collapsed. A mannequin placed to read as a guard when framed from the house. It had the same proportions as the owner if the owner had been interrupted mid-sentence and cast. I ran the path I had already walked. Shoes on, door open, gravel broadcast. The car acknowledged my fob. The drive down the switchbacks found my hand steady because there was no alternative. The road met the highway. The highway met the exit from my apartment. Water ran over my hands at the sink and rinsed dirt from under the nails in gray ribbons. My phone lit with a missed call. The name matched the one I had saved. I set the phone face down and listened for the belt chime in my head that wasn't there. The calendar still held the service appointment. The day still had hours left. The invitation still waited to be accepted or not accepted in a way that would register to the wrong person if I chose noise. He called again 4 days later. The voice carried no warmth, only an assumption that I'd return. I said yes without checking my calendar. The word came out because saying no would create a traceable reason, and reasons are what people like him collect. The drive was the same. Interstate, service exit, then a spine of 2-lane that turned against itself until the horizon disappeared. The gate was open again. It was always open, as if locks belonged to other people. The gravel held my tire tracks from last time, faint, half erased by weather. He stood in the doorway, waiting with both hands behind his back. No greeting, no expression. The kind of posture that implied the world already moved at his command. He turned before I reached him and walked deeper inside, past the hall of wood and shadow. I followed because that was the rule here. Silence first, understanding later. The house breathed differently that day. The air felt denser, filled with polish and humidity, as though the walls had learned to sweat. The coffee room still glowed faintly, but something had shifted. The scent was no longer roasted fruit and cedar. It was darker, scorched, like a wire left too long in a socket. He poured without asking. The same porcelain cups, the same slow grind, tamp, pour. Steam coiled between us, breaking the line of sight. When he finally spoke, his voice arrived low and calm, the tone of someone reading an instruction he had written himself. Do you ever think about what you'd trade for peace? The question hung there like another smell. I said nothing. He didn't seem to need an answer. He just nodded slowly, as though I'd agreed to something neither of us could name. He took a long drink, eyes fixed on the surface of the coffee as if there were coordinates inside it. He led me through another hall, narrower than before. On the left, shelves of objects wrapped in clear film. Watches without straps, old coins, a cracked compass, a pair of spectacles missing one lens. Each item labeled by hand in tiny, cursive. I didn't ask what they were for. He never said. The end of the hall opened to a study lined with books, old, unsorted, their spines unreadable from sun bleaching. A desk, neatly ordered, with a single sheet of paper placed dead center. Nothing written on it, just one sheet and a pen. The pen's cap was off, its tip dark as if it had been used recently. He rested a hand on the chair's back, not inviting, not denying. I stepped closer. On the paper, faint indentations, writing pressed but never inked. I tilted my head, caught fragments under the light. Words, numbers, a date, maybe. February something. Beneath that, a name I didn't know. He said, people always leave something unfinished. I waited. Sometimes it's better to finish for them. He turned away then, as if the conversation had completed itself. I watched the back of his neck, the thin line of skin where the hair ended. There was a small bruise there, round and old. He offered dinner. I didn't refuse. The table was already set. Meat, white rice, vegetables, all plated with machine precision. I ate without tasting. The knife beside my plate was heavier than it needed to be, its handle wrapped with black tape that felt too new. When I looked up, he wasn't there. The chair opposite me was still pushed back from where he'd sat. The cup beside his plate was full. Steam no longer rose from it. Somewhere behind the walls, a low hum began. Steady, mechanical, like a distant fan turning through air thick with dust. I finished eating because leaving food untouched felt louder than any refusal. I waited another 5 minutes, then stood, gathered my jacket, and found my way to the corridor. Halfway down, a sound followed, a slow step that matched mine with deliberate half-second delay. I turned once. Nothing. The lights along the baseboard flickered as if breathing. The bedroom they'd given me last time stood open. Inside, the bed was made. On the low table, a folded sheet of paper sat where I'd left my note days before. My handwriting still visible, but beneath it, another line had been added in the same pen. You came back. I folded the note once, slid it into my pocket, and looked around. No luggage, no sign of housekeeping. The smell was different. Not rot, not smoke, just age. Wood soaked with its own memory. Outside the window, the courtyard waited again. The mound sat where it had sat, but something about its surface had changed. The soil looked smoother, newly turned. The knives were closer together now, their handles forming a tighter circle. I leaned forward. Some had red cords tied to their grips, others black, forming a pattern I couldn't read. Behind me, a floorboard gave. I turned, expecting him. Nothing. The air, though, carried a shift, the subtle drop in pressure that happens when someone opens a door at the far end of a hall. I stood perfectly still, counting the seconds. 11. Then the pressure lifted. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened. The hum returned, closer this time. Maybe plumbing, maybe ventilation, maybe breath. I reached for my phone. No signal. The display read emergency calls only. I turned it off and left it face down on the table. Midnight came like the edge of a shutter closing. I heard movement through the wall, measured, deliberate. Not the shuffle of an old man, but the glide of someone practiced at not being heard. Then a sound I couldn't place. Metal sliding against wood, faint, rhythmic, like the sharpening of knives in another room. I didn't move, not until the sound stopped. When it did, the silence afterward had weight, the kind of weight that rearranges the air inside your chest. Hours passed, or maybe just one. When the faint blue of morning reached the curtains, I stood, packed nothing, and walked out. The main door was unlocked. The gravel remembered me again. No sign of him, no voice, no question. At the gate, I turned once more toward the house. The upper window glowed dimly, not electric, something softer, like flame behind frosted glass. I drove until the road stopped curving. At the gas station near the highway entrance, I washed my hands in the restroom sink. The smell of the house lingered. The polish, the burnt coffee, the faint trace of metal. When I returned to the car, my phone vibrated. One message. Unknown number. No text body, just an image attachment. It was my note, the one I'd taken from the bedroom table. But in this version, the added line had changed again. Now it read, "You never left." The following night, the car woke before I did. Its lights flashed once in the dark garage, soft, brief, enough to stain the ceiling white. When I stepped closer, the cabin display was already on, the rear-view camera feed alive with static. No ignition, no command, just movement inside a system that wasn't supposed to breathe without me. I watched for a while, thinking maybe it was a software update, but the screen blinked again, brighter, then dimmed as if someone had turned a dial from the passenger seat. I leaned closer. The lens caught me at an angle where my own reflection should have appeared. It didn't. The silence inside the garage was so complete that it registered as pressure on the ears. Then came the sound, small, deliberate, the kind of click that belongs to a belt buckle being released. The car's seat sensors chirped. Rear right, occupied. The air felt heavier when I opened the door. The screen cleared and displayed the usual layout. 4 seats, driver, passenger, rear left, rear right. Only the rear right glowed faintly red, signaling seatbelt unfastened. I sat in the driver's seat, and the indicator remained lit. A system test showed no error. Everything, it said, was functioning normally. I left the car running and stepped back out. The lights dimmed themselves. The rear camera feed flickered one last time before going dark. That was when I decided to drive. Not far, just enough to prove that distance still meant safety. The road out of the city was unlit past the industrial zone. The highway sensors traced the lane edges in pale blue. On the screen beside the speedometer, the human-shaped outline appeared again. Rear right seat, stationary, gray. The belt alarm pulsed once, stopped, and the outline dissolved. Then it came back, this time turned slightly toward me. It had no face, just an oval absence where one should have been. I told myself the sensor's depth map was glitching. Too much reflection from the windshield, maybe. Still, I drove faster. The system adjusted brightness automatically. The figure leaned forward. My pulse climbed into the rhythm of the tires. At the next exit, I pulled into a rest area. The lot was empty. Sodium lamps buzzed, coating everything in a film of yellow noise. I opened the rear door. Nothing but cold air and static electricity rising from the seat fabric. A smell followed, a faint metallic sweetness, like coffee left too long in a tin cup. I sat there until the lights overhead flickered twice, then steadied. No movement, no voices. Just that smell and the idea of someone sitting where no one was. When I got home, the hallway lights inside my building felt wrong, slower, as if they were reacting to something behind me. I walked without looking back. The apartment door shut with a sound sharper than usual. I locked it twice. The phone on the counter lit with a notification. One new message from VIP. No text, just a timestamp. 11:47 p.m. Same time as the previous visits. Attached was another image, this time of the car's interior, perfectly framed. My driver's seat empty. I didn't open the message again. I just unplugged the phone and placed it face down under a towel. Then I sat at the table and waited for the world to make a sound that would tell me where I still was. The refrigerator clicked on. The building's pipes hummed. Somewhere between those two noises, I thought I heard breathing, steady, human, measured. It came from the direction of the window. Outside, streetlights wavered under fog. In the reflection, the apartment behind me looked bigger than it was, as if it had added another room. And in that reflection, there was movement, small, deliberate, the tilt of a head from the rear right corner of the room. The phone vibrated once more under the towel. I didn't touch it. The car alarm outside armed itself automatically. 2 chirps, 1 blink. Then silence. Long, perfect, waiting to be owned. I slept in clothes that night. Not from fear, just the practicality of wanting no interruption between waking and leaving. The light through the blinds was the wrong color, gray with weight in it. I made coffee that didn't taste like anything and sat by the window, counting the distance between passing cars. Each sound arrived late, as if the air had thickened. The phone stayed under the towel. When I lifted it, the screen refused to wake. A faint heat pulsed from the back casing, steady and low. The smell of hot metal again. I dropped it in the sink and turned on the water until the steam cut off. Outside, the street was empty. No deliveries, no pedestrians, no stray dogs. The city runs on movement, and when movement stops, you start hearing the shape of stillness. I checked the building entrance camera. The timestamp looped. Same minute, same second, repeating. Before noon, the company called. The owner had requested another meeting. No explanation. They sent me an email marked mandatory courtesy visit. The phrase didn't mean anything, but the file attached to it did. His address, again, and a non-disclosure form already signed with my name in the signature line. I didn't sign it. I didn't delete it either. It sat there like an unopened envelope that hums faintly when you walk past. By evening, the air pressure in the apartment had changed. Doors that always shut cleanly began to resist. Water ran slower from the tap. Light fixtures dimmed and brightened, not flickering, breathing. I left all of it behind without turning anything off. The drive began in daylight and ended somewhere that pretended not to have night. The mountain road still curved the same, but the turns arrived in a different order, as though the map had rewritten itself to favor repetition. The gate was open. It always was. I stopped the car outside the gravel line and kept the engine running. Inside the gate, the fountain had stopped. The koi pond reflected a ceiling of unmoving cloud. Every surface looked rinsed. Grass, gravel, wood, clean but colorless. He waited by the door again. Same clothes, different shoes, polished until the leather caught the daylight and fractured it. He greeted me by name this time. The sound of it came out wrong, too smooth, as if practiced alone. Inside, no coffee today. No smell of roasting, only air thick with humidity and solvent. He led me straight to the study with a blank paper. Now the paper carried lines of writing, columns of names, each followed by dates. The pen rested across the middle, uncapped. Tip dark. He said, most people remember what they lose. Few remember what they trade. Then he told me to write something on the line beneath the last date. I didn't move. He waited, motionless, until waiting itself felt like a command. The clock in the corner ticked once every 5 seconds. Each sound erased whatever came before it. I picked up the pen and wrote my own name because any other word would have created explanation, and explanation is evidence. He smiled. The smile didn't touch his eyes, which stayed fixed on the paper like mirrors that had been polished until they refused reflection. He folded the page, placed it inside an envelope, sealed it with one slow press of the thumb, and slid it into the drawer. Then he locked the drawer and pocketed the key. "Now you belong somewhere," he said. He asked if I wanted to see the courtyard again. I didn't answer. He took silence as consent. The glass doors opened with a sigh. The mound was gone. The ground had been flattened, raked into concentric circles like a dry garden. Where the knives had been, small metal tags now stood upright, each engraved with a date and an initial. Wind moved across them like fingers across piano keys. He said, "Each piece has its own weight. The trick is learning how to carry all of them without leaving prints." Then he turned, expecting me to follow. We walked toward the detached building behind the main house. The lock was electronic, old keypad style. He entered a code I didn't see. The door opened to a room lined with screens. Rows of them, floor to ceiling, each displaying a static camera feed. Every angle was familiar. The hall, the coffee room, the study, the bedrooms, the courtyard. And one more feed at the bottom right corner. My apartment. The camera angle looked down from above the window. I could see my table, my sink, the towel still covering the phone. He turned to me and said, "It's better when people know they're being remembered. It keeps them orderly." I stepped closer. The image refreshed every 5 seconds, the same rhythm as the clock in his study. In one frame, the towel moved slightly. In the next, it didn't. He watched my reaction as though it were data being gathered. He said, "You left something unfinished there." Then he handed me a small metal tag, identical to the ones in the courtyard. It bore no date, only an engraving, "Rear right." The metal was cold enough to ache through skin. I didn't pocket it. I just held it until my hand stopped recognizing temperature. He continued speaking about patterns, about ownership, about how silence was the cleanest currency left in the world. I listened because not listening would have meant sound, and sound is what people like him measure. When he finally dismissed me, the sun had vanished behind a layer of unbroken cloud. The house lights followed me to the door, turning off one by one in order, like breathing in reverse. The gravel accepted each step without echo. At the car, I checked the rear seat before getting in. Empty. I drove. Halfway down the switchback, the seatbelt chime sounded, "Rear right," unbuckled. The display showed the same gray outline. Head turned toward me again. I didn't stop. The chime repeated until the sound became mechanical breathing. At the bottom of the hill, the phone in the sink vibrated once in memory I couldn't have heard. I reached the city before dawn. The light there is different. It comes from things trying to stay alive. Signs, windows, machines still on from the night before. I parked under my building, left the car unlocked, and waited for the noise of morning to prove it still existed. Nothing came, only the hum of ventilation and the faint click of cooling metal. Inside, the apartment looked staged, as if someone had rebuilt it from a photograph. The towel still covered the phone. The water in the sink had gone opaque. When I lifted the drain stopper, something metallic shifted beneath. A small tag, same size, same engraving, "Rear right." I set it beside the stove and turned every light on. The bulbs answered slow, a second late each. I tried to work, to write a report, to make the day exist on paper, but the keyboard kept adding characters I hadn't pressed. Letters, then numbers, then a date. The same one I'd written in his ledger. At 10:17 a.m., my inbox filled, 42 new messages, all from internal accounts that no longer existed. Each one contained a single attachment, screenshots of the courtyard from above. The mound returned frame by frame, rebuilding itself in reverse. Knives rising instead of sinking. Strings pulling taut. The ground unflattening like lungs refilling. I shut the laptop, unplugged it, and kept my eyes on the window. Across the street, in the reflection of another building's glass, I could see my own window from the outside. A shape moved behind it. Slow, mechanical, not mine. The tag on the stove had started to hum, faint but consistent, a frequency just below hearing. I wrapped it in paper and dropped it into the trash chute. The humming stopped. The phone under the towel lit on its own, screen cracked from the temperature shift. A new message waited from the same contact. No text, only coordinates and a file name. account_balance_final.csv. The name pulled a reaction out of my hands before I decided to move. I plugged the phone into the computer and opened the file. Rows of numbers scrolled past, each one paired with a name, a location, and a timestamp. The last entry carried mine. Next to it, a note. Asset transferred. The cursor blinked at the end of the line, waiting for another input. Before I could close it, a new row appeared. No typing, no sound, just existence. The name field stayed blank. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m. I looked at the clock, 4:26 in the afternoon. Still, I turned on every light again. Still, I waited. By night, the street was empty. Cars passed but didn't make sound. Somewhere far off, a siren started and never finished. The car downstairs armed itself twice. The seat sensors reported an occupant before I even entered the garage. I didn't check which seat. I didn't need to. I drove to the highway and followed it past the last exit. The dashboard camera recorded, silent. The way cameras record when they know no one will ever review the footage. The navigation system had no route loaded, but it still spoke. Proceed to the highlighted destination. No map, no marker, just an empty field of gray. The road narrowed, then rose, then circled back on itself. The mountains appeared where they shouldn't have been. The gate waited at the end of the asphalt, open, always open. The house lights burned low inside, one on in the study, one in the hall. The fountain moved again. The man stood by the door, same position, same hands behind his back. He said nothing when I entered. He didn't need to. The envelope lay on the table, unsealed now. Inside, the paper I had signed without meaning to, my name bleeding faintly through the fibers. He gestured toward the courtyard. I followed. The mound was whole again. The strings replaced, the knives upright, glinting in the light that came from nowhere specific. He stepped into the circle, feet placed between the handles, and crouched until his knees touched the soil. "You see," he said, "everything returns to balance. Every debt, every number." He pressed his hand flat on the ground and left it there. The earth pulsed once under his palm, a slow exhale that moved outward, reaching the perimeter of the circle. The knives trembled. The strings drew tight. He looked up at me then, not waiting for permission, and said, "It's yours now." The air folded inward. The color drained from the courtyard. When I opened my eyes again, the house was gone. Only gravel. Only the car waiting at the gate, engine running, rear seat occupied. I drove without direction. The city never arrived. The sky never changed. At some point, the display on the dashboard refreshed itself. New icon, single file name glowing in the corner. Account balanced. The belt alarm chimed once. Rear right, unbuckled. The sound didn't stop.